transporter.
You're on.
Right, thanks everybody. Peter is here with me from the School of Education or the College of, what is it going to be?
I think it's College of Education, Health, and Human Services.
There you go. So I'm here because in liberal arts and sciences, I have to deal with all of the academic integrity violations, claims, whatever. And clearly there are lots of implications with AI and academic integrity. I can say that in the last semester, more than half of the violations that were reported have some sort of AI, at least connotation to them. So this is something that is real. And it is something that we need to take seriously as faculty. And Peter has examples of syllabus statements that we might consider. So do you want to share, Peter?
Yeah, I can go first, and then we can hear a bigger picture of what's going on a larger level. So I'll go ahead and could you stop sharing your screen so that I could share mine? Thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and share mine. So I'm using a resource that I believe I received as a part of the Teaching with AI Fellows program that was run across the SUNY system. And I've added to it a little bit and adapted it slightly. But when we're thinking about informing students about what level of AI use is acceptable within our courses, I think increasingly it's important to be very specific about which assignments and the extent to which we're okay or not okay with them using these tools. I think to us, we all have sort of our internal assumptions about what's acceptable or not acceptable, but if we don't communicate that clearly to students, there's a real chance for some misunderstanding, and then we start heading into that territory of academic dishonesty that we already heard about from Paul. So I think when you're thinking about what you want to include in your syllabus for an AI policy, the first step is to consider the level of use that you're okay with for your course. And broadly speaking, there's going to be three levels. There's going to be some sort of limited use of AI. So some level is okay, but there's no free rein here. There are limits about what students can and cannot do. You can completely prohibit use of AI within your course, or you can encourage open use of AI within the course. And faculty members across the SUNY system are operating at all three of these levels within their courses. And so it's up to you really to make a determination at this point about what level you're okay with. And then there's a number of different samples here in this document. I wish I could drop it in the chat really quickly, but for those of you who are in person, it's going to not be all that helpful. But there are samples here of these different levels from across the SUNY system. We've got one from SUNY Oswego here, one from SUNY Oneonta, something from SUNY Orange as well. And then we have some samples of what you might include in your syllabus if you want to completely prohibit AI use, which typically includes an explanation as to why it's not appropriate for that particular course, and kind of expressly states what is not allowed for the students. And then finally, we have some samples here of syllabus statements that permit or encourage the use of AI and may even give some suggestions about where to use it or how to use it. And so, and warnings as well about to the student, if you do use the AI, these are the things you might want to look out for. For example, over-reliance and learning loss are real dangers if you become too dependent upon these tools. And then finally, what I have here is my policy. So as a quick aside, my original plan for the session was to hopefully draw on some of the other fellows who were part of the Teaching with AI program to get them to share their syllabi statements as well, so we could kind of hear from a panel of folks. But it's a busy time of the year, and there weren't too many people available. So instead, I pulled on this sort of stock resource. But my policy is one in which there are levels of use that are okay and then levels of use that are not okay. And I tried to make that as clear as possible for students by sort of breaking it out into specific levels of use. And so as a basic tool or resource, that's totally all right. As an organizational, to help with the organization of their writing, I allow it because I find that students really struggle as someone who teaches primarily graduate students, they really do struggle with organizing their thoughts. And so I really encourage students after they have a first draft to ask an AI tool for advice about how they can strengthen the organization of their writing. And it gives them very clear and actionable feedback that ultimately I find really improves the quality of their writing. Um, and then I also encourage them to make use of it for critical review, which is beyond just recommendations for organization, suggestions for revisions to their content, advanced grammar and style editing. So I'll ask students to prompt an AI tool, is this written in an academic voice? How could I improve the academic voice within my writing here? To get a list of things that they could do to improve what they've written, as well as contextual recommendations for their work. And so at this level of level 3, students are still expected to review, revise, and personalize any AI-generated content and safeguard their original thought and analysis, but they're still collaborating to some extent with the AI tool and receiving feedback on work that initially comes from them, but they're getting some targeted feedback on ways that they can improve what they've been doing and maybe make them more sensitive to issues or problems that might exist in what they've produced. And then I also spell out unacceptable levels of use. So extensive assistance is where raw content is being generated by the AI tool, which is not okay for the course. And full collaboration would be where the person who's using the AI tool isn't really generating anything, and the entire product is coming from the AI through prompts that lead revision and those kinds of things. So, yeah, I think it's important to be aware there's some nuance here in the level of use that people may or may not allow, and to acknowledge that for students and make it clear what's okay for you. And there's more and more tools that are coming out about that, trying to sort of map these levels of use. And so, for example, the Dara Mentor has this AI use pyramid, which I found helpful in sort of thinking about what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with. But even here, I find that the extent to which AI is an intellectual companion can be very different. The amount of the thinking that's happening between the user and the AI, it can vary. So I like thinking of it in this way, in this hierarchical way of like what's the extent to which it's being used, but I still haven't found something that really captures sort of my personal take, and so that's why I've generated my own sort of policy here. But yeah, thank you very much for your attention and time, and I'm interested in hearing more about what's going on at the college level or at this point, the university level to sort of spell out what sort of guidelines we'd like to have in place.
Peter. At the university level, it is not quite the Wild West at this point, but it's very close to it. There are lots of instances of instructors telling a student, I believe that you've used AI. I don't think there's any question about it. I am levying this penalty. And that is a difficult way to start a conversation. If you want to understand what the student has done, then the best way to start that conversation is not to say, you did this, you're in trouble. It's to say, I have concerns. Can you tell me about how you got to this? And in the majority of cases that I've talked with faculty about, when the conversation starts in that way, help me understand how you got to this product, the student is most likely at some point to say, well, I used ChatGPT to get me to this, but then I modified and so on. So at least you get some aspect of truth in there, and you can have a conversation about what the student's work was compared to what the tool's work was. I find that if you're immediately going to penalty, you put the student in a position where they will more likely prevaricate, will more likely say, oh, this is all my own work. I didn't use AI. You can't prove it. And in point of fact, it is very difficult, perhaps even impossible to prove it. So there are a number of AI violations that have been cited where the student has been given this penalty or that penalty. Presuming the student appeals, it puts the department chair, the associate dean in a very difficult spot, because our job is to, to try to come up with a conclusion that is fair. And if I go back to the instructor and say, well, the proof that you've given for this isn't adequate. You used 4 different AI checkers and they all said that it was 100% AI generated. We all know that AI checkers are poor. So that's not a good resource. The argument of this is completely different voice than the student's previous work. Well, that as well singularly is not enough to know that this is material that wasn't generated by the student. I have not yet had a case that has gone to appeal that I've gone to the instructor and said, I don't think this will hold up. I am putting it to the next level for other consideration, but that is coming. There are instructors out there who are penalizing students, and they have at best flimsy evidence. And that's whether the student has unethically used AI or not, it's not a fair situation, and we want this to be fair. So the advice that I have, make clear in your syllabus where you stand in the course. Spend class time to talk about this. Spend class time to talk about, I understand that you can use this for this, that, and the other, but I really want you to demonstrate that you've learned things and not that you've just chucked something into an engine and gotten a reply out. Create assignments that use AI in some generative way and allow students to see where that gets them, but then causes them to have to do some work on their own. So as to not just be ban this tool because it's bad, but demonstrate that the tool has some applicability. From an academic standpoint, I see this as most difficult in the gen ed course that the student is not engaged in. I'm an art major, I'm taking sociology 100, I don't care about it, it's just checking a box in general education. I just want to get out of this course with a decent grade. That's unfortunate that a student would have that mindset, but we all know that that mindset exists in some of these courses. So it's particularly important in those sorts of courses, in Math 102, in Soc 100, in the courses that you're going to have a lot of non-majors in the course, to disincentivize using a generative tool for the wrong things and to have the conversation. I think just by slapping penalty on, there are some students who will feel guilty about it and they'll accede to that, but there are a lot of students who won't, and you're not doing anything to further the learning process. You're not doing anything really to further integrity if you're penalizing a student and you can't categorically demonstrate it. It's unfortunate because the bad cheaters end up being the easy ones to catch. The student who takes the ChatGPT output that says, well, I'm just an AI engine, but here's what I think about this. And the student has copied and pasted that into a response. Easy to determine that it wasn't the student's work. But for the clever cheater, it's going to be much more difficult to determine that it's not the student's work. If you've designed prompts correctly, maybe in a one-on-one session, you can talk to the student about the work and say, you said you made this statement, go a little bit deeper and tell me where this thought came from. And if they got nothing, well, that's a little bit better evidence that they actually didn't write the work, that they didn't read the paper that they're summarizing or whatever it is. But just to say, on the strength of this thing that you've submitted, I'm sure that you've used AI and I'm failing you in the class, it's guaranteed to be a problem. So, my words of wisdom. You in the field, what are you seeing, and what are the problems that you're encountering?
I can chime in for a quick comment. So I've found that it is very important to meet and speak with students to get a sense for their level of understanding, and that those quick interviews about making an appointment and just having a one-on-one chat with them to talk about what they've written and whether or not they have a deep understanding of what's in what's in their work or not is a great way to sort of get a very clear picture of the extent to which they may have overly relied on a generative AI tool. And so if they're not able to really answer questions about the sources they used or about the concepts that they're discussing, that for me is a clear red flag that there is a problem. And I usually have to have sort of a difficult conversation with the student about that. And then if it happens again, that's when I would start to raise the flag where this is an issue or this is a problem.
And that's a good point. There are a number of instructors who have been talking to students early in the semester about, okay, I think that you've used ChatGPT or you've used whatever on this. Let's have a conversation about how you might have otherwise gone about doing things. I'm not going to give you a penalty on this, but now, we've established more clear guardrails, so you've got to stay within the boundaries. And at that point, if the student manifests something similar, you're in a better position from which to say, we've had the conversation, now I've got to do something about it. But if it comes out of nowhere, for the last paper of the semester, that's really tough to do anything about. If you've been turning a blind eye throughout the semester, not having the conversation, then it puts you in a bad position as an instructor at the end.
Yeah, I even try to preempt it with students when I introduce the AI policy in the first course. I kind of explain that, look, if I have any questions, I'm going to call you for a one-on-one conversation about what's in the paper. And if it's clear to me that you don't deeply understand it, then that's going to be a cause for concern. That's, for me, is a flag for academic dishonesty. And so I think sort of making that clear from the start for students is really important so they understand that they're going to be held accountable to anything that they include there. I mean, obviously to us, that seems like common sense, but sort of shining the spotlight on that and saying it directly to them, I think sort of raises their sort of alarm a little bit, helps them to understand like, okay, anything I put in my paper, I could be called on and asked, like interviewed in depth about. So I need to deeply understand anything that I'm including in here.
I would just add also that I think it's important that faculty member talk face to face or at least on a Zoom meeting with students, not just an email exchange, because I think so much gets lost in that email exchange, right? The student, the professor might indicate that they have some questions about work that was submitted, and the student receives that email, and it's kind of like, well, I mean, where do we go from here? The student will send an email to say, no, it's on my own work. And then the professor's like, no, I don't think it is. So I think that face-to-face, whether it's a Zoom face-to-face, because that's sort of an oxymoron, but you know what I mean? Just really that a conversational exchange, I think, is really important in determining the depth of understanding that the student has on the assignment, the content, and to really give the student an option, an opportunity to be honest and to move forward from there, rather than the email exchange. I think you can lose quite a bit in that, in trying to understand both perspectives.
Clark?
Yes, I just have a question to Peter about, thank you for sharing your policy. So in step 3, you have the critical review and you have students engaging in on a sort of more sophisticated way of looking at their writing. I'm just wondering, how do you then respond to their writing? Do you use AI tools to respond to student writing?
No, I don't. So I always just sort of, I mean, I do it in the traditional way. I mark it with like notes on the text. Most of my students at this point are online, and so I have a rubric. I mark them by the rubric, and then I make notes on the draft where like I notice things could be better or where something is particularly well done. One thing that I did try this term for the first time is after I marked all the student papers, then I asked AI to mark it using the rubric to see how its scoring compared to my scoring as a way of sort of triangulating. For the most part, we were relatively well aligned. It seemed like ChatGPT was a little more generous than me, though, in certain categories. Um, and in some cases, I revised upward because I asked it why it gave that mark instead of the mark that I gave, and it provided an explanation, um and I was kind of persuaded by it. I mean, I like not in all cases, but there were one or two papers where I gave students like one mark up from the criteria that I had marked them on the rubric because I was sort of like I think I focused on the negative, and ChatGPT was like, well, look at this and look at this. They did a really good job in these sections, and I was like convinced by that. So
That's a good positive use.
Just wanted to share a couple of things. So I read a paper which was published very recently in a marketing journal. There are some software that are developed to mass grade big classes, like 400 students. There's some good research in this area and some good platforms. Interestingly, the students found the feedback provided by AI, which was fine-tuned for grading, very helpful. It helped them improve. And at the same time, it led faculty who are teaching large classes, 400, 500 students, to focus more on creating content for the students or working on the lecture side of it. So I know from SUNY side, there is a group working on chatbots that can be used for making examples for the students or even eventually grading their interaction with AI based on how they respond to the conversations that AI generates. Interestingly, in marketing, I found a couple of companies that can create interactions like an interview session for a salesperson. So try to sell me this product, try to use the procedure that you have been told, and then it can measure the quality of the student interaction with the system. So I think there are so many changes that are happening very rapidly, and I hope we can get something good out of it.
I think John will have a session, is it tomorrow or Thursday?
Not about using it for grading.
No,
We
but
do have a
about
number of sessions.
creating,
That program, though, that I think you're talking about is called GradeScope, and Binghamton has been using it for about 1.5 years or so now in large classes. And it will read handwritten text, scans it in, and does, it'll read equations and so forth that were handwritten and graded.
Avery, did you have a question?
I agree with you about having conversations earlier in the semester about, asking them questions about, what do you mean here, what do you mean there? And it works because sometimes I get papers, that are very difficult for me to understand because they're like medical terms, obviously it's AI written. And it's good to talk to them and ask them, and they're like, oh my God. So I asked them, what do you mean here? Because I have no idea what you mean. And they're like, well, I have no idea what I mean. So, and then they, to get them to understand. My question for you, Paul, is, if they, keep on doing it, how do we report that? Because conversation is not really a concrete, thing to, submit.
Yeah, I think that it becomes a preponderance of evidence situation where you don't have, you don't have the smoking gun that you have in the plagiarism days where you can say, oh, this was copied and pasted from this journal article, done. But if you've been attentive and have had those conversations, and in week 3 and in week 6 and in week 9, for all of those writing assignments, the student comes up with, well, I don't know how I got that, this was just a divine inspiration or something. Okay, maybe once you can get away with that, but if you're repeatedly saying, I've turned in this thing that I've got no clue about, then I don't think any reasonable person would say, even though you can't prove that this was generated by AI, I don't think it's reasonable to suspend disbelief to the point that this has been miraculously generated by that student.
So
So,
that would be okay to, I haven't had that situation, but
yeah,
in a situation like that,
I-
that would be okay.
I think that would be supportable.
Okay.
It's really just the situation where an instructor comes with, okay, I've been seeing this all semester. Well, I haven't talked to the student, but I've been seeing it all semester. And well, that's great that you've seen it all semester and you've been tracking it, but you should have done something about it when you saw it the first time. Fire the shot across the bow that says, I'm worried about this.
Mhm.
And again, making it so that it's not just a conversation about punishment, that it's a conversation about learning, and the fact that you as the instructor want the student to learn, and that by using these tools inappropriately, it's not helping them learn. And if it's a course particularly that leads to a next course, then they're selling themselves short for how they can achieve in the next course. So again, if it's a gen ed in an area that they're not going to take again, that's a little bit harder sell that way, but you can still have the conversation throughout the semester. Express your concerns. From the student side, the thing that I've heard is students who come here from high school where they've been told you can't use AI for anything and it's completely forbidden and you mustn't use it. So students will then use AI to try to generate something that doesn't sound, I mean, they'll write their own answer, but they've been told this is too good. You used AI for this. So they're having to use AI to dumb down the things that they hand in so that it doesn't look good enough to alert suspicion, which is just nuts. And we want people to have ownership of what they turn in and not be worried about a police state mindset. But at the same time, as instructors, we don't want to have to worry about everything that's been turned in being authentic or not.
And in terms of like generating evidence, if that's a concern, if you're worried about it early on, I prefer to do those one-on-one meetings by Zoom so that I can record them, so that it's clear if I can ask students about their text with my screen shared, looking at something that they wrote, quote unquote, and they're not able to answer questions about it, basic questions about it, that there's some record of that conversation. And for the student, that's also a pretty loud alarm bell that there's something that they need to be concerned about in terms of what's going on here. Another thing that has come up that I have had to deal with is fabricated or hallucinated sources that were included in the references that don't exist. And so like I went to the journal, I looked at it and I was like, in this issue, this cuts across multiple articles. This isn't even an article that exists. So that's another case where there's some hard evidence of that something that shouldn't be happening is going on here. So.
And I think as I've seen the same thing, Peter, and I think that it's the sort of thing that if you have a research assignment in a class, give them something where you specifically say, go to ChatGPT and have it generate some sources and then check the top 5 sources and see what you find. And if you're asking for scholarly articles, it's almost the majority of times there's going to be something in the top 5 articles that are listed that doesn't exist. And I think that it's a great teachable moment to, to confront students. This looks like a legitimate article. It has names that are, at least some of them, recognized in the field. It has a title that is reasonable. It comes from a journal that exists, but you go to the journal and there's nothing there. It's it's the sort of thing that if a student is using ChatGPT to generate a whole paper, which unfortunately does happen, and they're not looking at those sources, that it can be a real wake up that, wait a minute, none of these sources are real? No, matter of fact. Michael, you had a question?
You were talking about it's on.
Yeah.
Okay. You were talking about hard evidence of unethical use of AI. One thing that is always on the cusp of hard evidence or not hard evidence in math courses is people who do absolutely perfect on homework assignments, online timed quizzes. They can complete everything within 5 minutes, even though it's supposed to take 60 minutes. And then it's time for the in-class exam, and 30%. That's what they end up with. And, at that point, it's not even necessarily hard evidence that they were using AI. It could be that they were cheating in some other way. It could be that they have imposter syndrome, that they have some kind of medical situation going. I mean, how far can we even talk to the students about whether or not they've been using means that they're not allowed to without invading on their privacy, their medical history, their learning inaccessibilities, and so forth?
I think that having the conversation doesn't predispose you toward anything that would be, that we don't want to force students into talking about. It just creates a space where you can say, I have this concern. This is your moment to either assuage that concern or to talk to me about the struggle you're having with the course. And yeah, I used ChatGPT on that homework assignment because I was really stuck. Okay, well, that's good to know that that's the case, but that's not helping you learn. And when you get to the exam and you get a 30 on it, how is this helping you? So I think that by having those low stakes opportunities, so you can see, okay, that they seem to be doing really well on these low stakes assignments, and then to have a relatively early higher stakes assignment, an exam that they can't easily cheat their way out of, and to be able to see that offset gives you an opportunity in week 3, week 4, week 5 to have a more substantive conversation to say, when I see an offset between incredible grades on quizzes and assignments and terrible grades on exams, that worries me. And I realize that students have whatever problem they have with in-person exams, and that could lead to another conversation about using accessibility resources. But just you as the instructor seeing that offset is something that is worth bringing to the student's attention. And at that point, if it's not in the mode of penalty, if it's in the mode of caring and learning, it at least gives the student the opportunity to come clean and say, yeah, I've been using it on this because I'm really struggling. Can you give me some other ideas about what I can do to succeed in this course? Which may or may not work, but at least you've had the conversation. They know what you're thinking, you know what they're doing, and it puts things on a little bit more level playing field.
And what would you suggest would be a good method for situations like online, asynchronous, unproctored exam situations where we have no means of being able to timely get a hold of students or make sure that they're not using AI unethically for online exams or for assignments?
John, what's the nostrum for this?
It's one of the things we'll be discussing in the reading group this fall. It's a major issue. Some campuses have moved to using proctored online exam proctoring services, but even those have a lot of flaws. Some people have just stopped teaching online in various institutions because of this, because online work is very hard to protect from AI use. Unless you build all of the assignments where students are using AI and reflecting on that. Although you could always have AI generate reflections on the use of AI itself. So it does make, basically one of the things that's advocated is using the TIL framework where even if you're teaching a gen ed course, you get students to buy into the motivation for what they're learning, how this is going to be useful for them. The skills they're developing are going to be useful in future classes or later in life. And if we can get students to believe that, they're much more likely to do the work themselves, especially if they have opportunities for revision. But one of the reading groups is focusing exactly on this issue, because both for online work and much of the work we do, we have students doing that work outside of the classroom. And we do need to find ways of motivating students to actually learn the material rather than relying on AI to do the work for them. And it's very difficult, as many people have said, to detect this reliably.
Yeah, I don't think that, I mean, there's obviously not an easy answer, duh. But for this summer and this fall, we're in a real pickle. Math 158, Stats A, one of our gen ed math courses, prerequisite to Math 258, which is required for a bunch of majors. That's a
208.
course, and 208 as well. The proctoring service that we've used has told the campus that they're not going to do business with us because we don't generate enough revenue for them. Each student pays a certain amount for one class at a time, and we don't have enough students being proctored to make it fiscally advantageous for the company to do this. So we're without the proctoring service, be it as it may, for the fall, and at least one instructor in Math 158 is saying, I don't want to teach online if I don't have this, because I don't know what I'm going to do with exams. It's just going to be a cheat fest. And I think without restructuring your course in such a way as to have it not be just traditional high stakes exams, and to have it sort of reverse engineer things so that you're anticipating the potential pitfalls of AI, you're stuck. If you don't have some sort of security measure, you don't want to do it. And we're currently in a position where we don't have that measure.
And I would encourage everyone to sign up for the opposite of cheating, which is the reading group that focuses on ways of promoting academic integrity when AI is present. One other thing is that cheating rates went up dramatically during the pandemic, and they don't seem to have really changed with AI based on most surveys. But cheating rates are dramatically higher ever since 2020. So what's happened is people were relying on Chegg and other services during the pandemic, and basically they mostly canceled those subscriptions, and they've moved to generative AI, which is much harder to detect. So
I don't think that we have, by and large, a lot of students that are intrinsically unethical. I think that we tend to put students in positions that make unethical behavior less risky, so they go in that direction. So if it's a class that they don't feel matters to them, if they don't think that Math 158 or Math 208 is going to actually, they're learning that material is going to help them as marketing majors or as accounting majors or as whatever majors, then it's more likely to take that risk. So part of it is on us to, from the start, make it clear that this class is important to you. Maybe you're not a math major, maybe you don't see yourself as a math proficient person, but being able to do the math that is in this class is important to your being a good fill in the blank accountant, salesperson, CEO, whatever.
I just have a question. I don't know if anyone read the New York Times article that was published about a week and a half ago about a professor who was using AI for their note taking in their course, or maybe was creating the notes that the students had to take. And one student found out about it and sued the school and tried to get their tuition back. I mean, is this something that we need to worry about ourselves when we use AI in our courses? is it just one of those things that as long as we tell the students that we're doing it, it's okay? Or is it just something that we need to be careful that we don't make students uncomfortable with what we choose to use with AI?
Speaking for myself and my little portion of the university world, I think that as long as we're upfront with what we're doing and why we're doing it, that it takes the curse off. But I think that there are people who like to turn the tables in situations like that. And, you know, that they think that if I can't use this, then why can you use it? So there's something in that mindset that makes sense on some level, but I think, again, if you're open, that it takes a lot of the unsavoriness out. Kathy?
So just as a follow-up on this, coming soon to Brightspace is going to be an AI tool called Lumi. And part of the terms of use that SUNY signed is that any instructors who are using Lumi to create course content have to disclose that to their students.
Yeah. Plenty of time for more questions.
Just a question about that pyramid that you showed earlier, Peter. Those three levels 1, 2, and 3, what was the composition of that pyramid supposed to represent exactly? Was the top supposed to be most preferred, and the bottom was least preferred? Was level 1 supposed to be the most preferred because it's the foundation? Are there levels 4 and 5? Do they fit into this pyramid somewhere, as in what you're not supposed to use? I was just wondering, the picture's nice, but I'm having trouble interpreting exactly why it's a pyramid. What do the levels mean exactly?
I just realized I'm muted. Okay. Yeah, so the levels are the extent of the use. So AI as a tool would be like, hey, find me 6 sources that I could use. AI as a helping hand would be something like, I put together this list of sources. This is how I organized them. Do you think that this makes sense? Would you suggest an alternative way of organizing these? And then AI as an intellectual companion is even deeper than that, where you're sort of talking through your plan or your idea or your concept, and at each step of its development, sort of getting feedback and working together, sort of a back and forth where you're bouncing something back and forth between them. I don't think this is like the be all end all, which is why actually I ended up using something different because there's a lot of nuance in each of these steps even that I feel like is lost. But I think we're still kind of at this early phase of people adopting these generative AI tools and using them in their work. And we're still trying to kind of get a sense for what's a good way of understanding the different levels of use that people are using, or that we can see in people's use of these tools. And it's just one way to sort of create a taxonomy or a way of understanding those different levels. I don't, again, it's okay, this pyramid, but I don't think it's the gold standard quite yet. I think that this will continue to develop as we get a better understanding of the different ways in which people are using these tools.
Yeah, because one thing that comes to mind when I see the term intellectual companion is that I think back to those days in high school where you had a group of individuals that were all intellectual companions, but there was that one intellectual companion who had to do all the work, as opposed to their 4 other intellectual companions who were sitting around and waiting for them to finish doing the work. And so I wonder, AI as an intellectual companion, is that the relationship that they are taking that to mean? And if so, that could be a problem.
I think your comment there really helps sort of capture that this is not a new danger of people relying on outside supports more than they should. And that we've seen this in the past in things like group work um, or students being able to do something in the class when there's clear scaffolds that are there to help them, but they struggle a lot when you take away those supports. And so it's the same danger. It's just sort of a new, a new sort of vector for it to enter into the learning process.
else? Anything from anyone online?
One other diagram that's useful is going to be coming out in a podcast tomorrow that Tom Tobin talks about, where basically one of the things he suggests is that when students are doing basic skill level development, you don't want them to be using AI for that. But we also want to be preparing them for using AI in their potential future occupations and so forth. So the amount of use that students should be making of AI will depend on the level of the course, and that we'd expect to see perhaps that increasing. So, you know, in general, a lot depends on the specific context of your course. So he has a nice little diagram showing how you move up to higher levels of development and you become more proficient. And then you move towards a paraprofessional type level as people move into graduate study and so forth. The use of AI should be ramping up. But one of the problems is, in order to use AI effectively, you need a certain level of expertise in the discipline to be able to analyze the output, to critically evaluate it. So we do want to make sure that students develop those critical thinking skills early on, so that, and this basic skills and knowledge in the discipline, so that they can work with AI tools effectively.
Yep.
And he has a nice diagram. It's in the show notes. Or
Tomorrow at 6 a.m.
Yeah, I have an activity actually that sort of builds on that, where students ask an AI, generative AI tool in class to generate an action plan for an initiative that they have in mind that could be implemented on a university campus. And then I ask students to critique it, and they struggle to, because a lot of them don't have a lot of professional experience quite yet in that sort of administrative work. And so they have no sort of standard to judge the timelines that are presented, or they don't really deeply understand the sort of processes, administrative or curriculum processes that are involved to have something happen, and how slowly those things can move. And so it's sort of a learning opportunity for them to realize that this is a tool, but if you don't have the knowledge to make informed decisions, or to deeply understand what it's generating, then it's also sort of a trap, because you may end up with something that's completely unusable, but you don't realize it. You think you found a solution. And so raising that sort of critical awareness in students, that they have this, they understand they need to have enough knowledge to make an informed sort of judgment about what's produced, I think is very important.
Anything else? Go forth and do good things.
and have lunch,
And have fun.
which is the right.
Thank you, people online.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye, everyone.
Hmm.